Hello, everyone. I am Jamie Mayo, back for the Kansas City Public Library's Make Do Tell story for the final episode. And after today's story, you will have 11 stories in your repertoire if you follow along from the beginning. And that is an excellent start on building a repertoire of stories. You will not only have those 11 stories, you now have the tools to go out and find stories of your own, figure out if you can tell them because they're not under copyright, and start to shape them into your own. These are all the skills that you've been gathering. You know how to take the bones of a story and write that out, and then start building the story up from there. So I decided today that I would tell you a story that I've been working on for several months. And this is a story that I love so much. I found it in this book, The Serpent Slayer and Other Stories of Strong Women. And pretty sure this is a copyrighted story because I did not find any stories just like it. She had some brilliant things that she pulled together. I then found it on the web, Clever Monka, the story of a girl who knew what to say. It's a bit different. And then I went and started playing around with it to make it my own. And so I'm just going to tell you that story because I've tried like 3 times to get it worked out to tell you one of the regular stories, and I keep reverting back to the one that I came up with. So I took the story and I started to think about how might this have meaning for me. And I grew up on a farm down in southeast Missouri. My people have been farming for a long time, and my niece is carrying on that tradition with, she got her agricultural degree and her teaching degree, which are the 2 things my family seem to do. And so I just used her name. So I called it Clever Mara after my niece. And again, it's Clever Monka from the web, Clever Marcella from the book, and Clever Mara from me. So Mara was coming in from the field. She'd been working hard all day, but she'd had this tune that kept playing around in her head and then disappearing, and she was so engrossed in it because it was now finally starting to come together. So engrossed that she did not notice the sweat drying on her skin. She did not notice the sun getting tangled up in the branches of the tree as it tried to slip below the horizon. She didn't even notice that pile of something that shouldn't have been there in the middle of the road until she tripped over it and fell flat on her face. She pushed herself up and looked around, wondering what on earth could have been, because she walked this road every day and this had never happened. Well, as it turns out, there was a bag lying in the middle of the road, a sack of something that was hard. It had stubbed her toe. It kind of hurt. She turned around, she got her hands on that sack and got it opened up. Uh-oh, she said to herself, gold coins. Gold coins, oh, this is not good. This is not good. I mean, how does a bag of coins just end up in the middle of the road? This is not good. And she knew she couldn't just leave it there. And so she grabbed it and she went on home. That tune was completely gone now. She knew she was never going to get it back. She was a little disconcerted about that because it was a good one. She got home, up on the property, there was her pa standing right by the well. And he was splashing some nice cool water on his face, taking a drink, and she thought that looked pretty good, so she dropped that bag of coins right by his feet, clanked and grabbed the ladle so she could have a drink too. Well, her pa looked down and was, what's that? That sounded like gold coins to me. It's been a long time since I've heard such a thing. What are you doing with gold coins? She said, I found it in the road. This is fabulous, he said to her. This is so good. We haven't had a good meal, and this depression this is like the answer. All this hard work done. She said, Pa, this is no good thing. Think about it. And he started to think about it and realized, indeed, maybe this wasn't such a good thing. So Mara, all she wanted was some supper, and then she was off to bed, she said. She would sleep on it, and she would have an answer in the morning. And her pa knew that it was so because his Mara was the cleverest woman, cleverer than any of the men as well, cleverer than any of the children. She was smart. She'd have it worked out by morning, because that's how it worked with her. And all of that was well and good, but somewhere in the middle of the night, when he was tangled up in the sheets and these thoughts kept coming about what could happen, because this gold was just laying on his kitchen table, he got to fretting. And the more he fretted, the more he was like, I gotta get this out of here. And so he grabbed that bag of coins after he got himself dressed in his finest shirt and pants and his work boots, and he walked himself on into town to the magistrate's house. And he was sitting there on the step when the sun rose that next morning, and the magistrate come stumbling out of his house, a little bleary-eyed from sleep still. He said, stood up, he said, Magistrate, I've come, I've brung you this bag of gold coins that my daughter found. And the magistrate said, you brought me a bag of gold coins? That, you do know that of course you know, how else would you have that bag of coins? The bank was robbed yesterday, middle of the afternoon. Why, whatever, he said, I'm gonna have you put in jail for stealing this bag of coins unless you can bring me the other two, and then we'll call it good. Well, what do you mean the other two? I don't know anything about any gold coins except for this bag here. I know it's not mine. I don't know who it belonged to. I brought it to you. The magistrate was bent on getting him put into jail unless he found those other two bags of coins and brought them along too. Well, Pa knew he should have waited. He should have waited, because Mara Shirley would have, and now look what a pickle he'd gotten himself into. He turned around, because the magistrate is like, I'll give you till noon tomorrow to bring me those other two bags of or you're going to jail. So he headed on back home, and there he found Mara sitting on the porch step there, finishing up her last little bite of breakfast, getting ready to head out to the field. She said, where you been, Pa? What you dressed like that for? We got work to do. You did something with those coins, didn't you? She said, I had it all worked out. He said, yeah. And he told her exactly what had happened. Well, about that time, the widow Miller, she just come toddling up the lane and called out, yoo-hoo, how you this morning? I wonder, have you heard the news back down in town? And before Mara and her pa could say yes or no, she just went on and told them all about that bank robbery that had happened. She said it was right in the middle of the daytime. These masked men came in, and they got away with 3 bags of coins, one each. And some folk, you didn't hear it from me, but some folk think that it was the Oliver boys, because they smelled a whole lot like that still that they keep up in the hills. The Oliver boys, of course. Mara knew then and there exactly how she was going to get her pa out of the scrape he got himself into. So after she finished up her work in the field that day, she settled down to her supper, and then when it got good and dark, she headed up real silent-like up into the hills, up toward that still, the last place that it had been known to be. And she was being as quiet as she could be so she wouldn't come up on those boys and them hear her, when she heard a snoring like you would not believe. All that stealth wasted, because those boys were already passed out, snoring to beat the band, and wouldn't you know it, there were those 2 bags of gold just sitting right out there in the open, because that's what the Oliver boys would do. So she just went and she grabbed those 2 bags of coins and she headed on back home. Next morning, she got up and she went into the magistrate, plopped those down on his porch where he was sitting, and said, there you go. I'll thank you to leave my daddy alone. He said, well, why shouldn't I throw you in jail? How is it you have all these? She said, I believe that you know we had nothing to do with that. And here I got your coins back, and that's no way to thank a girl for doing your job. He said, well, I've heard about you, Mara. I've heard folk around here talk about you. You're awful clever, they say. I tell you what, you tell me who did rob this bank, and I'll let it all go. And she said, I don't think you want to touch this, just leave it alone. And he got to think, he said, you know what, I think you're right. But I will not press on that issue, but I will say this. I do like that moonshine those Oliver boys do, and I think it might be into that for me, so I'll let you go, but not clean. Here's what I require of you for the clean slate. You come to me tomorrow, neither walking nor riding, neither dressed nor undressed. And if you can do that, we'll call it a wash. I want to see just how clever you are. So Mara decided she'd do it because she liked a good challenge. So she went on home. She was thinking about it. That second one, that was easy. That first one, that took a little more thought. And it wasn't till about the time she was knocking off work again that evening that it came to her. She took a sheet off the line where it had been drying all day, and she laid it out. And then she went back into the shed where that hobo who'd been riding the rails through here and stopped off near their place, who'd come asking for work not too long before. She'd put him to work. She'd fed him good. She even paid him a little bit of money for his help. And he was so pleased with all that that he wanted to give her something. So he gave her this thing that she couldn't make heads or tails out what to do with, but now she thought it would just do the trick. So that next morning, she got herself wrapped up nice and tight in that sheet with her legs free enough that she could use that, what do you call it again? That pogo stick that he said he'd invented when he'd been down Wichita way. And sure enough, when he showed her how to do it, it was the answer to her need right now. So she got herself wrapped up, she jumped up on that pogo stick, and she began to hop her way into town. Well, when the magistrate saw her coming, he started laughing. He laughed so hard he near rolled off that porch. And then he said, why don't you come on up here? You certainly are as clever as they say. You come on up here, I'll go get some lemonade. You're probably hot and thirsty. And we'll just sit and talk a bit. And so they did. After the first hour, that magistrate was quite taken with Mara. After the second hour, he thought maybe he'd like to spend a lot more time with her. After the third hour, he asked her for her hand in marriage. And after the fourth hour, she thought that'd be a fine thing to do. He said, now the thing is, you have to promise me not to go putting your nose in my business. He said, I'm the magistrate around here, I make the decisions, and you're clever and all, but this is my job. And so she thought that was fine, and she agreed, and it wasn't much longer before the two of them were married. And life went on really, really well until, you know how it goes. One day, that magistrate, who, by the way, I forgot to tell you, had come down from St. Louis, and he was a little bit of a city slicker about some things, and he made one of those city slicker decisions. A farmer had come to him because when he'd gone to market with his mare, she was a lot closer to giving birth than he understood, and she had crawled up under the wagon of that farmer from across the county that everybody knew to stay away from. He was a little bit shady. She'd gone up under that wagon and had the foal. And so that farmer claimed it was his because it was born under his wagon. So the two of them had taken it to the magistrate. Magistrate had ruled in favor of the other farmer. And this farmer was so mad about it, he's pushing his way through the doors, and he almost bowled Mara over because she was on her way in. She knew him. They'd grown up together, and she said, Claude, what's the matter with you? You so mad? And he said, well, that husband of yours, he just made the most boneheaded decision I ever heard. And he told her all about it. Well, she knew every once in a while he hadn't made the best decisions here and there, but this was her friend Claude, and she couldn't let this one go, and she had an idea. So she made Claude swear he wouldn't tell where he got it from, but she suggested something that Claude sure enough thought was a good idea. And that's how Claude came to be standing in the middle of the road the next morning, casting out his fishing line, pulling it back in, casting it out. When along comes the magistrate. The magistrate said, "Claude, what on earth are you doing?" He said, "Well, it seems pretty obvious. I'm fishing." And the magistrate said, "Well, it seems pretty obvious to me that you're not going to catch any fish right here." And he said, "Well, it's about as likely to catch fish here as a wagon is to give birth to a foal." Well, the magistrate had the good grace to admit that he'd been thinking about his decision and he knew it was the wrong one. So he said, "Tell you what, Claude, I will make it right. Let's go. I'll get you your foal back." He said, "But you got to tell me, how'd you come up with this?" He said, "'Cause I'm kind of," since he said, "Oh, I was just out fishing and, it just came to me." He said, "Claude, no, seriously, magistrate, I was just fishing." And finally the magistrate let the poor guy off the hook, and they went and they got his foal back. Well, about the time supper time came along, he was making his way back into his house, and he called out to Mara and said, "I'm home, need to talk to you." And she said, "Well, come on in, I'm finishing up supper, have a seat at the table and I'll be right in." And so he did. He sat down and he said, "I do believe that when we married, you agreed, if you put your nose in my business, that I'd be sending you home to your pa." She said, "Well, we did agree to that. And what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I ran into Claude today." Claude folded, did he? He couldn't help himself, I guess. He said, "Now, Claude was fine. He didn't tell me, but you just gave it up. And so, I tell you what, I don't want folks saying that I am not a fair man nor a generous man, so you can take anything that you want from this house when you go." She said, "Well, indeed, you are a fair and generous man, though I'll miss you. I did agree. But why don't we just sit down, be ashamed to waste all this?" And so she got that bottle of moonshine, that jug that they kept, and every time the magistrate took a drink from the bottle, she filled it back up with moonshine. And by the time they got to dessert, he was just about face down in it. Soon as he was passed out like that, Mara ran out and to see if she could flag somebody down, and wouldn't you know it, here comes Claude. She said, "Claude, get in here, you owe me." He said, "Mara, swear I didn't tell." She said, "I know you didn't. I gave it up myself. He tricked me. Come on in, though I need your help." And so the two of them loaded up the magistrate into the wagon, and Mara headed on back to her pa's place like she had promised she would do. Well, the next morning, the magistrate woke up, and it was like his head had been split in two. He was so bleary-eyed, he had no idea where he was. He looked around that room, and he felt that coarse quilt that he was laying up under, and he didn't recognize that lumpy bed he was laying in, but then he saw Mara. As his eyes came into focus, there she was, sitting in a rocking chair, just working on a little bit of patching up some clothes. "Where am I? What's," she said, "Oh, well, you're at my pa's place." And he said, "Well, what am I doing here?" And she said, "Well, you might remember last night you told me I could take anything I wanted from the house, and the thing I wanted the most was you." The magistrate realized that Mara was indeed more clever than he was, and he had been foolish to send her on home. And so the two of them packed back up and went back to their house, and they lived happily from that day on. And that is the story of Clever Mara, which is a lot like Clever Manka or Clever Marcella. Thanks for tuning in this week. I will put the links so you can check out the book if you want, so you can find the online version of the story, so you can think about how you would make this story yours. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays at 1, we will have programs for you to make, do, tell something. Take care.